I was staring at a Wells Fargo statement showing 42 cents where $85,000 used to be. Money I'd scraped together cent by cent, year by year, into my autistic daughter Maya's special needs trust. Gone. Evaporated. Spent on floral arches and raw oyster bars at a Malibu wedding that hadn't even happened yet. And the worst part wasn't that my mother-in-law had taken it. The worst part was whose electronic signature was sitting right there on the transfer authorization, clear as day, in 12-point Arial font. My husband's. Kevin's. The man who'd kissed me goodbye that very morning and told me to have a good day. Let me back up, because this story didn't start with a bank statement. It started the way most disasters do, slowly, quietly, with 100 little moments I told myself didn't matter. I grew up watching my mom work double shifts at a diner in Fresno, clipping coupons, splitting restaurant meals with my sister, doing whatever it took to make sure we never had to ask anybody for anything. That upbringing gave me a spine. It also gave me the accounting skills that eventually landed me a senior auditor position at a mid-sized firm in downtown San Diego, which meant I spent my days following paper trails for a living. I was good at it, really good. The kind of good where other people's lies showed up to me like typos on a page, glaring, impossible to unsee once you'd spotted them. I should have turned those same skills on my own marriage years earlier. I didn't. That's the part I have to live with. Kevin and I met at UC San Diego, back when I was a 23-year-old grad student drowning in econometrics homework, and he was a charming, easygoing guy who brought me coffee and made everything feel lighter. He was the kind of person who smoothed things over before they became problems. Or so I thought. He hated conflict, genuinely seemed physically pained by it. At the time, I found that kind of endearing, that softness in him. Later, I'd understand it differently. Later, I'd call it what it actually was, cowardice dressed up in manners. We got married in a small ceremony in Balboa Park, just close friends and family, nothing extravagant. I wore my grandmother's earrings and cried happy tears and meant every single word of my vows. I thought we were building something real. Maya came along 4 years in. She was the most beautiful, complicated, astonishing human being I'd ever laid eyes on. By the time she was 3, we had the diagnosis: high-functioning autism, what they used to call Asperger's. It meant she was brilliant in ways that left her teachers speechless. It also meant the world didn't always make sense to her the way it made sense to everyone else. Loud sounds could send her into a spiral. Unexpected schedule changes were devastating. Social situations were a minefield she had to navigate with a map nobody had given her. Parenting Maya required patience and creativity and a willingness to advocate loudly and constantly in a world that was not designed for her. I loved every single exhausting, joyful, terrifying second of it. Kevin did too in the early days. He was a good dad when things were simple. It was when things got complicated that you found out who Kevin really was. The Special Needs Trust was my idea. I'd done the research because I always do the research. That's just who I am. A Special Needs Trust in California is a legal structure that lets you set aside money for a child with disabilities without jeopardizing their eligibility for government benefits like SSI or Medicaid. It's ironclad. It's protected. It's sacred, as far as I'm concerned, because the whole point is that this money is there when you're not, when Kevin and I are gone and Maya still needs support. I started funding it when Maya was 4, a little here, a little there, bonuses I could have spent on vacations, tax refunds I could have used on furniture. $85,000 over 9 years. $85,000 of my future peace of mind, my daughter's future security, sitting in an account that was supposed to be untouchable. Supposed to be. Our life in the Carmel Valley suburb of San Diego looked pretty good from the outside, I'll give it that. We had a 4-bedroom house with a backyard, the kind of neighborhood where the HOA sends passive-aggressive emails about trash can placement, and everybody waves at each other while secretly judging the landscaping. Kevin worked in commercial real estate, made decent money, spent a lot of it on golf and fantasy football. I was the one with the real financial discipline in our marriage, the one who tracked the budget, paid the quarterly taxes, made sure we had 6 months of savings in an emergency fund. Kevin called me the family CFO, like it was a compliment. Looking back, I think he meant it as a way of explaining why he didn't have to pay attention. I was handling it. He didn't need to. Margaret, Kev's mom, my mother-in-law, lived 40 minutes north of us in a house in Oceanside that, as I mentioned, turned out to be registered to my LLC. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Margaret was the kind of woman who could say something devastating with a smile on her face and then look genuinely hurt when you reacted. She had this talent for the perfectly placed comment. "Oh, Olivia, that casserole is so creative," she'd say, in a tone that meant it was inedible. Or, "Maya's doing so well, considering," with that little pause before considering that was doing a lot of heavy lifting. I'd been swallowing those comments for 9 years. 9 years of Thanksgiving dinners where I did all the cooking and Margaret forgot to mention my name in the toast. 9 years of Kevin saying, "She doesn't mean it like that, babe," every single time I brought it up. 9 years of telling myself it was fine, it was manageable, it wasn't worth blowing up the family over. Then there was Chloe. Kev's younger sister, 28 years old, had never held a job for more than 6 months at a stretch, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Escondido that Kevin and I had been quietly subsidizing for 3 years under the guise of family helping family. That was Margaret's phrase. Family helps family, Olivia. It came up every time Chloe needed rent money, or a new laptop, or a plane ticket to visit a boyfriend in Austin. We'd paid for Chloe's braces at 24 because she'd refused to get them as a teenager. We'd co-signed her car loan after her credit score cratered when she stopped paying her credit cards. Every time I raised an eyebrow at Kevin, he'd give me that look, the tired, slightly pained look, and say, "She's my sister. What am I supposed to do?" And because I loved him, because I believed in us, I let it go. Every single time, I let it go. The first sign that something had shifted came in January, about 8 months before everything exploded. Margaret called on a Tuesday afternoon, which was unusual. She normally texted, because she knew I was busy during work hours. I answered because Maya's school sometimes called from a local number, and I was always afraid to miss it. "Olivia, sweetheart," Margaret said, and already the sweetness felt engineered, like she'd rehearsed it. I had the silliest question. I was helping Chloe with some financial paperwork, and I just needed to confirm. "What's Maya's social security number?" I went very still. Not panicked yet, just still. The way you go still when something doesn't add up and you're not sure why yet. "Why would Chloe's paperwork need Maya's social security number?" I asked. The pause on Margaret's end was approximately half a second too long. "Oh, it's just a formality, something about the form. You know how these things are." I said I'd have to look it up and call her back. I never called her back. I also never mentioned it to Kevin, which is something I've thought about a lot since. Some part of me already knew that mentioning it to Kevin meant the information would get back to Margaret immediately, and I wasn't ready for that. I just filed it away, put it in a mental folder labeled "Things That Don't Add Up," and kept moving. February brought the next thing. Kevin started being weird about his phone. Not dramatically weird. Kevin wasn't dramatic about anything, but subtly weird. The screen tilting away when I walked into the kitchen. Notifications silenced in a way they hadn't been before. One evening I came downstairs for water at midnight, and he was in the living room, laptop open, and he snapped it shut the second he heard my footsteps on the stairs. "Just catching up on emails," he said, but his jaw was tight, and he didn't meet my eyes. I stood there in the dark kitchen in my socks, and I thought, very clearly, he's hiding something. I didn't say it out loud. I went back to bed and lay there staring at the ceiling and told myself it could be anything. A surprise for my birthday, an issue at work he wasn't ready to talk about, something stupid with his fantasy football league. I told myself a lot of things in those days. I was good at it. Chloe's Instagram was the next breadcrumb. She'd been posting more than usual, all of it wedding content, invitations with gold calligraphy, swatches of ivory fabric, sunset photos from the coast with captions like "Getting Closer" and little ring emojis. Her fiancé was a guy named Brandon, whose family had money. Old money, the kind that came with a last name people recognized. Chloe had met him at a wine tasting in La Jolla 18 months ago and got engaged in 6 weeks, which was very Chloe. What caught my attention was a specific post in late February. She'd shared a story from the venue's account, a ranch in Malibu, the kind of place that made your eyes water just looking at the website. Outdoor ceremony space with ocean views, 5-star catering, minimum spend that I could see referenced in a comment she'd replied to, a number with a lot of zeros. I showed Kevin the post and said, lightly, casually, "That venue looks expensive. Brandon's family covering that?" Kevin shrugged and said, "Yeah, I think so, between both families." He said it without looking up from his phone. He said it like it was nothing. And maybe I should have pushed, but I didn't. I went back to making dinner, and the moments slid by, and I filed it away in that mental folder, which was getting crowded. I found the document on a Wednesday in late March. This is the part of the story I've told 100 times in my head, played back in slow motion, narrated to myself in the dark on nights when I couldn't sleep. I was working from home, which I did 2 days a week. Kevin had left early for a showing. Maya was at school. The house was quiet in that particular morning quiet way that I used to love. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. I needed Kevin's W-2 for something I was cross-checking on our joint return. A simple thing, routine, the kind of errand you do on autopilot without even really thinking. I went to the accordion file folder we kept in the home office closet, the one where we stored all the important documents. I flipped through to the tax section, and right behind where the W-2s should have been, there was an envelope I didn't recognize. It was from Pacific Trust Services, the company that administered Maya's special needs trust. I knew that letterhead. I'd seen it 100 times. It was the bland, beige, institutional logo that I associated with security and relief, with the knowledge that no matter what happened, Maya had a safety net. The envelope had been opened. The flap was ragged, torn like someone had gotten into it in a hurry, and then folded back more or less flat, the way you do when you don't want something to look opened. I pulled out the letter. My hands were completely steady. That's the thing I remember most vividly, how steady my hands were, right up until they weren't. The letter was a transaction confirmation, dated 6 weeks earlier. It outlined a distribution from the trust. The amount was listed twice, once in numerals and once spelled out in words, the way banks do it to prevent any ambiguity. $85,000. 85,000 cents. Distribution authorized by co-trustee Kevin M. Harland. Enjoying the story? Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is on your side of the world. I read them all. The paper made a sound when I set it down on the desk. A very small, very final sound. I sat there and looked at it for what felt like a long time, but was probably 30 seconds. The lawnmower outside had stopped. The refrigerator hum was very loud. I thought, in a completely calm and rational way, there must be an explanation. I thought, this has to be a mistake. Maybe Kevin had needed to temporarily move funds for some tax reason. Maybe there was a document I was missing. Maybe the account had been compromised and someone had made an unauthorized transfer. That last thought, the fraud angle, was the one I grabbed onto hardest, because it was the one that didn't require Kevin to have done something unforgivable. I opened my laptop. I logged into the trust account portal. The transaction history loaded in about 4 seconds. $85,000 transferred out on February 14th, Valentine's Day. He'd done it on Valentine's Day. The receiving account was listed as a joint checking account, mine and Kevin's. Then there was a second transfer from that checking account 4 days later to an external account. I didn't recognize the account number, but I recognized the memo line. Harland Castellano Wedding, final deposit, vendor coordination per Margaret H. I sat back in my chair. The coffee on the desk beside me had gone cold. I picked it up anyway and took a sip, and it tasted like absolutely nothing, like drinking gray water. I set it back down very carefully, as if setting it down wrong might break something. My daughter's face came to me, fully formed and specific. Maya, at 8 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, completely absorbed in the book about deep-sea creatures she'd been obsessed with that entire winter, her finger tracing the illustration of an anglerfish with that focused, intent expression she gets when something has her full attention. That image was so clear and so specific that it felt like a physical thing, like something lodged in my chest. $85,000. The Anglerfish book. February 14th. Margaret H. The pieces were all there. I just had to decide whether I was brave enough to look at the picture they made. I closed the laptop. I put the letter back in the envelope. I put the envelope exactly where I'd found it, tucked it back into the accordion folder in the same position, and I closed the closet door. Then I went to the kitchen, sat down at the kitchen island, and didn't move for a long time. The quiet was enormous. Outside, a car went by. A dog barked twice and stopped. The refrigerator hummed. I remember thinking that this was what it felt like to be standing on the edge of something. Not the falling, not the landing, but that specific second of suspension when you know the ground has already gone out from under you and there's nothing left to do but see where you end up. Kevin came home at 6:30. I had dinner ready. I'd made pasta because it was Maya's favorite, and Wednesdays were hard for her anyway, the weak middle exhaustion that sometimes made everything feel wrong. Maya was at the table drawing in her sketchbook with the focused quiet that meant she was happy. Kevin dropped his bag by the door, kissed the top of Maya's head, came into the kitchen and said, "Smells good, babe." He opened the fridge. He got himself a beer. He was completely normal. He was so completely normal that for one wild second, I thought maybe I'd misread the document. Maybe I'd gotten confused. Maybe the $85,000 was somewhere I wasn't seeing. And then he said, "How was your day?" And I said, "Good, quiet." And I put food on the table, and we ate dinner, and I listened to Maya tell us about the book she was reading at school, and Kevin laughed at something she said, and I sat there across from both of them thinking, I will never be the same person I was this morning. That version of me is already gone. I waited 3 days. I know that sounds strange, like who waits 3 days after discovering their husband stole $85,000 from their disabled daughter's trust fund? But I needed those 3 days. I needed to be sure. I needed to verify what I'd found, double-check the transaction trail, make sure I wasn't missing something. And honestly, I needed to not be shaking anymore. Because by Friday, I was not shaking. By Friday, I had pulled together every document I needed, cross-referenced the transfer with our joint account statements, confirmed the external account belonged to a vendor coordination service that Margaret had apparently hired for the wedding, and logged the IP address that had initiated the online authorization, which did not match any device we owned or any location Kevin had been at on February 14th. That IP address resolved to Margaret's ISP. The authorization had been initiated from Oceanside. Kevin's electronic signature had been applied from Margaret's house, from Margaret's computer, from an IP address registered to Margaret's home internet account. Which meant, and I turned this over and over in my mind, being absolutely rigorous, being the most careful auditor I'd ever been in my professional life, which meant either Kevin had been at his mother's house and used her computer, or Margaret had forged his digital signature, or, most likely, Kevin had provided his login credentials to his mother and let her do it herself while maintaining plausible deniability. I had evidence for the transaction. I had the IP address. I had the memo line. I had enough. Friday night, after Maya was in bed, I sat down across from Kevin in the living room. I'd turned off the TV. He looked up from his phone, a little surprised. We usually half-watch something on Friday nights, a Netflix show or a game. I said, "I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to not make me repeat myself, because I'm only going to say this once." Something shifted in his expression, a tightening. He put the phone down. "Okay," he said. "I found the letter from Pacific Trust Services," I said. I kept my voice completely even. I'd been practicing that evenness for 3 days, the way you'd practice scales on a piano, over and over until it became muscle memory. The transaction confirmation for the $85,000 distribution, the one authorized with your electronic signature from your mother's IP address on February 14th. He went very, very still. The color in his face did something complicated. Not exactly draining, more like rearranging. "Olivia," he started. "I'm not done," I said quietly. "I verified the receiving account. I verified the secondary transfer. I know where the money went. What I want to understand, Kevin, is whether you're going to sit here and tell me the truth, or whether you're going to try to explain this in a way that assumes I'm too stupid to understand what I already know." The silence in that room was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Kevin looked at his hands. He looked at the floor. He rubbed the back of his neck in that way he had when he was trying to find a version of the truth he could live with. Finally, he said, "My mom was in a tough spot." His voice was low and rough around the edges, like he was speaking through something. The wedding costs got out of control, and she'd already put herself in a really bad position trying to cover it, and I knew you'd never agree, so you took my daughter's money," I said. "Our daughter's money," he said, quickly, like that distinction mattered. I just looked at him. "The trust is in Olivia's name," I said. "It was established with my funds, my employment income, my bonuses, my tax refunds. Every dollar in that account came from my paycheck, Kevin." He started to say something and then stopped. I said, "I want to understand one thing. When you authorized that transfer, when you handed your login to your mother, or when you sat at her computer, whatever exactly happened, did you think about Maya? Did you think about what that money was for?" He was quiet for a moment that lasted too long. Then he said, "Mom said it could be repaid before Maya ever needed it." "She's 9, I said. "She will need it. The whole point of the trust is that I won't always be here to make sure she's okay. Do you understand that?" He said, "Olivia, I know this looks bad. I need you to hear me," I said. "I need you to stop talking and actually hear me for once. How do you justify this? Give me one justification. One." He looked up then, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't expected. Not guilt, not shame, but a kind of desperate rationalization, the look of someone who'd already talked himself into a position and couldn't find the way back out. "Chloe deserves a real wedding," he said. "She's been through a lot, and Brandon's family is already contributing, and this was important to her, and—" He trailed off, seemed to hear how it was sounding, started again. "Maya's going to be okay. She's high-functioning. She's got us. She doesn't need—" He stopped. He genuinely stopped himself, which means some part of him knew exactly how the next sentence was going to land, but I had to hear him say it. I sat there and waited, still as furniture, and eventually the silence pulled it out of him. "Maya's never going to Stanford anyway," he said. "I mean, she's not going to need the same kind of financial support that it's just different. The needs are different. And $85,000 is a lot of money, and Chloe needed it, and I thought—" He stopped talking because I stood up. I stood up very slowly and very deliberately, and I looked at him for a long moment without saying anything, and then I walked to the bedroom, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and I breathed. I breathed for a long time, and something inside me went very, very cold. The next morning was Saturday. Kevin was still in the house, sleeping on the couch. He'd tried to come to bed, and I'd said, with a quietness that apparently communicated clearly, that he should find somewhere else to sleep. Maya came downstairs at 7:15 like clockwork, which was Maya every morning, an internal alarm she'd had since she was an infant. She wanted oatmeal with blueberries and her ocean documentary, which was a phase she'd been in for 3 months and showed no sign of leaving. I made the oatmeal. I put on the documentary. I sat beside her on the couch and watched footage of deep-sea thermal vents and listened to her tell me about the microorganisms that live in conditions that would kill anything else. She was luminous. She was talking about extremophiles with the same passion other kids used for cartoon characters, and she was so completely and entirely herself that I felt something break open in my chest. Not in a painful way, but in a determined way, like a door I'd been hesitant to open finally coming off its hinges. I was not going to let anyone touch her future again. Not for floral arches, not for oyster bars. Not for Chloe's Malibu Ranch wedding, or Margaret's sense of entitlement, or Kevin's endless, spineless avoidance. It was done. I spent Saturday making calls. My first call was to Linda, a family law attorney I'd worked with professionally on a fraud case 2 years prior. She was sharp and efficient and had exactly 0 patience for nonsense, which was exactly what I needed. I gave her the broad strokes over the phone: special needs trust, unauthorized distribution, forged or improperly applied electronic signature, approximately $85,000. She told me to come in Monday morning with every document I had and to not discuss the situation with Kevin or Margaret until we'd spoken. I said, understood. My second call was to my CPA, Marcus, who'd done our taxes for 6 years and knew our financial picture in the kind of detail that would be useful in the coming weeks. My third call was to the Pacific Trust Services Administrator to flag the unauthorized transaction and ask about the process for clawing back the funds or pursuing the trustees for breach. I was not crying. I was not panicking. I was making a list and working through it, item by item, the way I'd always handled every hard thing in my life, by converting chaos into a sequence of tasks I could control. Sunday, I spent 8 hours at the kitchen table after Maya went to bed. I went through every financial record I could access: joint tax returns going back 5 years, Margaret's financial disclosures from when she'd applied to refinance her Oceanside house, which was mortgaged to me through a holding LLC I'd set up for investment purposes 6 years ago. That was the thing Kevin apparently hadn't thought about, or hadn't thought mattered, or had decided to conveniently not remember. The Oceanside house, the house Margaret had lived in for 11 years, decorated from top to bottom, treated as wholly and exclusively hers, was titled to Harland Property Holdings, LLC. My LLC. Kevin was a signatory, yes, but the LLC's operating agreement was crystal clear about who held controlling interest, who made distribution and disposition decisions, and who had the authority to initiate legal action. Me. Just me. I read that operating agreement 3 times on Sunday night, not because I needed to, but because I found it steadying. Kevin had never paid much attention to the LLC structure. He'd signed documents because I put them in front of him, and he trusted me, or maybe because he just didn't bother reading things carefully. Either way, the operating agreement said what it said. The house was mine to deal with. But the IRS piece, that was the part that developed slowly, like a photograph coming into focus in a dark room. I had Margaret's Schedule K-1s from her share in a small family partnership she'd run with Kevin's late father. I had the partnership returns. I had discrepancies that had been sitting in those returns, flagged nowhere, addressed by nobody, for at least 4 years. Income that had been consistently mischaracterized, deductions that didn't hold up to scrutiny, a set of related party transactions that had all the hallmarks of an arrangement specifically designed to reduce reported income in a way that bore very little relationship to economic reality. I had been a financial auditor for 11 years. I knew what I was looking at. What I was looking at was not aggressive tax planning. What I was looking at was fraud. Not enormous cartel-level fraud, but the quiet, persistent, this has worked for years kind of fraud that the IRS takes very seriously when it's finally brought to their attention, particularly when the person reporting it can hand them a complete, annotated, cross-reference documentation package rather than just a tip. I worked until 2 in the morning. Then I went to bed and slept for 5 hours. The deepest sleep I'd had in weeks, and woke up to Maya's alarm at 7:15 and made oatmeal and blueberries and watched an extremophile documentary and felt, underneath the exhaustion, something that I can only describe as clarity. Monday morning, I was at Linda's office at 9 sharp. I put the file on her desk, 47 pages, organized by category, tabbed, and indexed. She looked at it for a moment and then looked at me and said, "You put this together over the weekend?" I said, "Yes." She said, "What exactly did you do before this?" And I said, "Senior auditor." She nodded slowly, like that explained a great deal. We spent 2 hours going through everything: the trust distribution, the IP address evidence, the memo line on the secondary transfer, the LLC structure and the Oceanside property, the tax discrepancy documentation. Linda was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Okay, here's how I'd approach this," and we started building a plan. The wedding was scheduled for the following Saturday. A rehearsal dinner was happening that Friday evening at the Malibu Ranch. The actual venue, a place called Cypress Ridge that I'd found on Instagram when Chloe's posts had gotten specific enough to narrow it down. Brandon's parents had flown in from Connecticut. His extended family was booked into hotels up and down the Pacific Coast Highway. It was going to be a big event, and the rehearsal dinner was going to be the kind of thing people remembered. I wanted people to remember it. That was the whole point. By Tuesday, I had filed the IRS complaint, not a tip line call, but a formal Form 3949-A, referral of suspected tax fraud, accompanied by a 63-page documentation package that I assembled with the same care and attention to detail I gave my highest-stakes client audits. I filed it electronically and mailed a physical copy to the relevant field office. Then I notified Pacific Trust Services' legal department of my intent to pursue civil action for breach of fiduciary duty against Kevin as co-trustee, which triggered a freeze on any remaining trust account activity. Then I called our joint bank and initiated the process of separating our accounts, which I was authorized to do because the accounts were set up in a structure that allowed either party to act unilaterally. That move blocked the joint checking account, the account where the $85,000 had briefly stopped before continuing on its way to Margaret's wedding vendors. Kevin's direct deposit for the following week would have nowhere to land. He noticed on Tuesday evening. He came into the kitchen where I was cooking, and his face was doing something controlled and tight. "The joint account is showing restricted access," he said, like he was reporting a tech issue. "I'm aware," I said. I kept stirring whatever was on the stove. "Olivia," his voice was lower now, an edge to it. "You can't just, that's our account. I need access to that account." "You needed $85,000 from our daughter's trust fund, and you took it," I said. "So I've made some adjustments. You need to talk to me before you do things like this. The way you talked to me before you took the money," I said. He didn't have an answer to that. He stood in the kitchen doorway while I plated the food and called Maya for dinner and behaved for all the world like a woman who had everything completely under control, which was exactly what I was. Kevin called Margaret that night. I know because I could hear him in the garage, his voice low and urgent, going for long enough that Maya asked me twice why Daddy was outside so long. I said he was on a work call. She accepted that and went back to her book. I stood at the kitchen sink and looked at the backyard and thought about all the HOA emails I'd received over the years about the correct placement of the trash cans, and the neighbor who kept asking me to get involved in the neighborhood watch program, and the ordinary, suburban, completely intact from the outside life that I was in the process of carefully and deliberately dismantling. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like taking off a coat that had always been 3 sizes too small. Wednesday, I got a call from Margaret. She'd waited less than 24 hours, which told me Kevin had given her enough to panic. She opened with concerned sweetness. "Olivia, sweetheart, I think there's been a miscommunication about—" I cut her off. I said, "Margaret, I'm going to stop you there because anything you say right now could be part of the record I'm building, and I prefer you to talk to a lawyer before you talk to me." The silence on her end was absolutely spectacular. "The record," she started. "Talk to a lawyer," I said, and I hung up. My hands were steady. The coffee tasted like coffee. Thursday, I had a meeting with Marcus to finalize what I was handing to Linda versus what was going directly to the IRS. Marcus kept making small sounds of disbelief as he went through the partnership documents. Not loud sounds, just these quiet little exhales, like someone discovering a structural problem in a building they thought was fine. "These K-1s go back how far?" he asked. 4 years that I have documentation for," I said. "There may be more." He looked at me over his reading glasses. "You're absolutely sure you want to do this?" "Yes," I said. He nodded. "Okay," he said. "I want to make sure the documentation package is airtight before it goes anywhere it can't come back from. I built it to hold up to scrutiny," I said. He smiled then, small and dry. "Yeah," he said, "I can tell." Friday evening, Cypress Ridge Ranch, Malibu. I drove up the Pacific Coast Highway with the windows down and the radio off, and the ocean on my left going gray and silver in the late afternoon light. The ranch was up a winding private road lined with white oak trees, the kind of entrance designed to make you feel like you were arriving somewhere important. Cars were parked along the verge. Mercedes, BMWs, a Range Rover with Connecticut plates that I figured belonged to Brandon's parents. Inside the gates, there were lights strung through the oaks and tables being set up on a stone terrace, and somewhere a string quartet doing a sound check. It was beautiful. It genuinely was. I could see exactly why Chloe had wanted it, why Margaret had been willing to do anything to give it to her. It was the kind of setting that made everything feel permanent and important and real. I parked, checked my bag one more time, envelopes, documents, my phone with the voicemail recording I'd made of Margaret's Tuesday morning call, which I'd been careful to inform her was being recorded the second she started talking about miscommunications, and got out of the car. The terrace was full of people in cocktail attire. I was wearing a midnight blue dress I'd bought at Nordstrom specifically for this evening, simple and understated and entirely appropriate for a rehearsal dinner I had not been invited to. I spotted Kevin near the bar, talking to a man I didn't recognize, tall, gray-haired, the easy posture of old money, who I guessed was Brandon's father. Kevin saw me at almost the same moment I saw him. The color left his face so fast it was almost clinical. He said something quick to the man beside him and started moving toward me, cutting through the crowd with his shoulders up and his eyes already doing that negotiating thing, that calculating the damage thing. "Olivia," he said, reaching me, grabbing my elbow, "what are you doing here? You cannot be here right now." "Let go of my arm," I said pleasantly. He dropped his hand. "I'm here to finalize a few things," I said. "I'll be brief." Margaret found us approximately 45 seconds later. She materialized from somewhere to my left in a silver cocktail dress, her expression cycling through surprise, alarm, and then settling on the particular kind of outraged dignity that she'd always deployed when I'd said something inconveniently true at a family gathering. "Olivia," she said, "this is not the time or the place." "I think it's exactly the time and place," I said. I reached into my bag. I produced 2 envelopes, one for Kevin, one for Margaret. I handed them over with the same calm, matter-of-fact manner I'd used to deliver a quarterly audit report. The first document in each envelope is a notice of termination of the LLC operating arrangement with respect to the Oceanside property, effective 30 days from today. That's your house, Margaret. You'll need to make alternate arrangements. Something happened in Margaret's face that I'd never seen there before. Real fear, unvarnished and unmanaged, cutting through the composure like something breaking. The second document, I continued, is a copy of the IRS Form 3949-A filed on Tuesday, along with a summary of the supporting documentation. There are some irregularities in the partnership tax returns going back to 2020 that the IRS will be looking into. I recommend getting ahead of it. Kevin's mouth had opened. No sound came out. And the third document, I said, is a copy of the civil complaint I'm filing on behalf of Maya's Trust for breach of fiduciary duty. The amount sought is $85,000, plus interest, legal fees, and punitive damages. I was aware, in the particular hyper-alert way of adrenaline, that we had an audience. Brandon's father had drifted close enough to hear most of that. A woman in a red dress, who I pegged as Brandon's mother, had stopped talking to her companion and was watching us with careful, evaluating attention. Several other guests had gone still in the radius of our conversation. Chloe herself appeared from the direction of the venue building, looking first confused and then increasingly horrified as she read her mother's expression. "You can't. You're doing this here, now, at my rehearsal dinner?" Chloe's voice broke upward into something between a question and a sob. I turned to look at her. She was beautiful in a pale green dress, her hair done, her face perfect, and she looked at me like I was a monster. "You're ruining my wedding," she said. "You ruined my daughter's future," I said. Not loudly, not with heat, just quietly, clearly, the way you'd state a fact in a deposition. You spent her money on flowers and catering, and nobody in this family said a word, so I'm saying mine now. I turned back to Kevin and Margaret. "You'll both want lawyers," I said. "Good ones." Kevin finally found his voice. He said, "Olivia, please." And the please was so naked and small that for a second, just a second, I felt something that was almost pity. Then I thought about Maya at the kitchen table, tracing the picture of an anglerfish, oblivious to the fact that the net under her life had just been cut away. The pity evaporated. I looked at Margaret one final time. She was holding the envelope with both hands, gripping it like it might fly away. The silver dress caught the light from the oak trees. Behind her, the string quartet had stopped playing. "Family helps family," I said. I picked up my bag. I walked back through the oaks, past the Connecticut Range Rover, down the private road, to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment with my hands in my lap and listened to the sound of the Pacific Ocean somewhere below the cliffs and thought, very clearly and with something that felt almost like relief, it's done. The drive home on the 101 was the clearest headed I'd been in weeks. The road was mostly empty at that hour, and I had the radio low, something instrumental, and the windows still down even though it was cold. I thought about Maya, at home with the sitter, probably already asleep, probably dreaming about anglerfish. I thought about all the things I was going to have to navigate in the coming months, the legal process, the divorce proceedings that would inevitably follow, explaining things to Maya in ways she could hold, the logistics of a life reorganized. It was a mountain of it. I knew that. And underneath the knowing was something very quiet and very solid, a bedrock-level certainty that I had done the right thing, that I would keep doing the right thing, that whatever it cost me, it was going to be worth it. I stopped at a gas station in Malibu Canyon and got a terrible cup of coffee from the machine inside and drank it in the parking lot under the fluorescent lights and thought, I am going to be okay. Not the watered-down, reassuring kind of okay that people say to fill silence. The real kind. The earned kind. The wedding didn't happen. Chloe called it off 3 days later. Or, more precisely, Brandon called it off, which Chloe experienced as Chloe calling it off, the distinction being important to her, but not especially relevant to anyone else. Brandon's parents had apparently had a very quiet conversation with their son after the rehearsal dinner, and the conclusions they'd drawn from Margaret being served IRS fraud documents in front of 30 witnesses were not conclusions that made them enthusiastic about welcoming that particular family into theirs. The venue deposit was forfeit. The vendor contracts were in breach. The flowers that had been ordered, real flowers, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fresh-cut peonies and garden roses, were delivered to a venue that no bride came to collect, which struck me, when I heard about it, as exactly the right ending for all of it. Margaret hired a tax attorney within a week of the rehearsal dinner, which was smart. The IRS doesn't move fast, but when they move with everything they've got. And the documentation package I'd sent them was thorough enough that the case was clearly not going to be dismissed on a technicality. The field office opened a formal examination in May. As of the last update I got from Linda, Margaret was cooperating and negotiating, which is the option you choose when you are a 63-year-old woman and the alternative is criminal prosecution. The back taxes, penalties, and interest were shaping up to be substantial, north of $200,000, potentially more depending on how far back the examination eventually went. The Oceanside house, which she'd had 30 days to vacate and managed to use 43, was now part of the LLC's portfolio and was being listed for sale. The proceeds would go toward Maya's trust replenishment, a fact that Linda had structured carefully in the civil settlement agreement Kevin had signed in order to avoid having his co-trustee breach become a criminal matter on top of everything else he was already dealing with. Kevin was at a residence inn in Mission Valley. I know this because Maya asked me once where Daddy was living, and I told her the truth in age-appropriate terms, and she'd nodded and then said, "The one near the Costco?" which was such a Maya thing to say that I'd had to turn away for a second to compose myself. Kevin had a lawyer. Kevin was cooperative in the legal proceedings, in the way that people are cooperative when they understand they have no leverage. He'd lost his job in February. The commercial real estate firm had apparently not appreciated the reputational complications of an employee named in a civil fraud complaint, even a civil one, even one that was a family matter, and was trying to piece together contract work. His credit score, last I'd heard from the forensic accountant Linda had brought in, was doing things that credit scores are not meant to do. He called once in November, and I let it go to voicemail, and the voicemail said he was sorry in about 15 different ways that all amounted to the same thing. He was sorry this had happened, not sorry he'd done it. I deleted it. Maya and I moved. We found a house in Point Loma, smaller than the Carmel Valley house, with a different backyard that backed up to a canyon where you could hear coyotes at night. Maya was initially resistant to the change. She is always initially resistant to change. But within 3 weeks, she had developed a detailed log of every coyote sighting and was working on a theory about their territorial boundaries that she planned to turn into a science fair project. Her school did a fundraiser that fall and raised enough for an additional therapy session per week, which she'd been on the wait list for. She was doing well. She was doing better than well. She was, as she always was when the world gave her room to be herself, extraordinary. The bank statement that had started everything, I kept it. I know that probably sounds strange. I kept it in a folder in my desk behind all the other documents from that period. And occasionally, when I needed to remind myself of something, I'd open the folder and look at it. Not the 42 cents where the money had been, the transfer record, Kevin's name, the date, February 14th, Valentine's Day. I kept it the way you keep a scar, not to be morbid, but because scars are information. They are a record of what you survived and what it cost you and how you came out the other side of it. I had lost a marriage I'd spent 11 years building. I had lost a version of my life that I'd believed in, genuinely believed in, for long enough that its loss was real and its weight was real, and some mornings I still felt it like weather. But I had not lost the one thing that mattered most. Maya's trust was being replenished. Maya's future was intact. And sitting in the Point Loma house on a quiet Tuesday morning, listening to my daughter catalog coyote sightings in the canyon behind our backyard, that bank statement didn't scare me anymore. The quiet in our new house had cost me everything I thought I wanted. It turned out to be worth so much more.